Hi there. Today I'm focusing on the story of Nkosi, true African revolutionary, a man who led guerrilla army for over a decade of continuous war and led the people of Mozambique from the yoke of colonialism to freedom. To some, Samora Machel was a visionary leader whose talent for guerrilla warfare and his choice of revolution was a necessary step in securing the country's independence. While to others, the idea of using a revolution as a means to capture and consolidate political power has less appeal. Samora Machel, in this sense, is seen as a tool of a dictatorship that eventually resulted in a bloody and destructive civil war in the country. Join me in this edition of Afro Perspectives as I trace the story of Samora Machel from his humble beginnings in the rural hinterland of southern Mozambique to his rise as President of Mozambique. Samora Machel was born on September 29, 1933 in the village of Chilembene in Gaza province, located in the southern part of Mozambique. He was the third son of farmers Mandande Moses Machel and his wife Gigie Te Madzimba. Unlike most males of his generation, Machel's father Mandande escaped the colonial practice of forced labor practiced by the colonial authorities and worked in the gold mines in South Africa. In 1926, using wages from the gold mines, Mandande managed to buy a farm, and through farming he became relatively prosperous. However, the Machel family farm was later confiscated by the colonial authorities. Samora Machel attended the Catholic-run primary school at Wamekzinga, walking a 5-mile round trip each morning. In 1950, at the age of 16, Samora was forced to convert from Protestant faith to the Catholic faith as a condition for taking the 4th grade exam. In 1952, he secured a place in the nursing program at Miguel Bombarda Hospital, today's Maputo Central Hospital. In 1956, after graduating, Samora's first job was on the island of Inyaka. Then in 1961, Samora returned to a night school program run by the Methodists. He subsequently applied for an advanced nursing program from which blacks were previously excluded. Although Samora excelled in the written component of the exams, he failed the practical and oral components. It appeared that his reputation as an opponent of the colonial authorities had stood in the way of his ambition. Upon his return to the Mozambican mainland, Samora got a job at the Miguel Bombarda Hospital. He started a relationship with Sorita Chiancomo, with whom he had 2 children, Joselina and Edelson. In 1959, he distributed anti-colonial material to fellow hospital workers, resulting in him being placed under surveillance by the colonial authorities. Consequently, on March 4, 1963, Samora Machel crossed the border into Swaziland, and from there he ended up in Francistown, Botswana, where he was placed on a flight to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. 2 key events significantly influenced Samora Machel's life and changed his future trajectory. The first was the independence of a succession of African countries, starting with Ghana in 1957, then Algeria and the Congo in 1960. The second was the formation of the Mozambican Liberation Front, known in Portuguese by the acronym FRELIMO, by Eduardo Mondlane in 1962. Upon arrival in Tanzania, Machel impressed Dr. Eduardo Mondlane and was among the first platoon of Frelimo recruits selected for training in Algeria. After completing 9 months of guerrilla training in Algeria, he returned to Tanzania to train and then lead 250 guerrillas in their initial assault against the Portuguese colonial authorities in Cabo Delgado province on September 25, 1964. In 1965, Machel was assigned a special mission to lead operations in the eastern sector, specifically in Nyasa province. Leading a unit of Frelimo guerrillas, he embarked on an 11-day march through rugged and sparsely populated terrain. By the 5th day, their food had run out and water supplies were unreliable. Although Machel demonstrated remarkable leadership, his rise within Frelimo was influenced by several factors. In 1966, Philip Magaya, the Frelimo Secretary of Defense, was assassinated. On October 10, 1966, while on a patrol, he was shot by one of his own men in Nyasa province. Initially, it was claimed to be an accident, but it later transpired that the assassination was the work of the Portuguese secret police, PD, the International and State Defense Police. Following Magaya's assassination, Machel was promoted to Frelimo's defense secretary. He established the headquarters of the National Commanding Council at Frelimo's new base camp, Farm Number 17 in Nachingwea District, southern Tanzania. In 1969, another assassination deprived Frelimo of its founding leader, Dr. Eduardo Mondlane. He was killed by a parcel bomb. Again, PD, the colonial secret police, was again implicated in the attack. In 1969, Samora Machel was appointed to a 3-person council of the presidency alongside Marcelino dos Santos and Urias Simango. Despite his demanding role as a guerrilla leader, Machel continued to engage in personal relationships. In May of 1969, he married Josina Mtemba, who led the women's section in Frelimo's Department of International Relations. By May 1970, the Council of the Presidents was dissolved, allowing Machel to step into the role of interim president of Frelimo. He afterwards soon assumed full leadership of the movement, with Marcelino dos Santos becoming vice president, while Urias Simango was expelled from Frelimo. Frelimo faced significant challenges from its inception, including factionalism and the assassinations of key leaders such as Magaya and Mondlane. Under Machel's leadership, however, the movement grew stronger. In 1970, Frelimo crossed the strategically vital Zambezi River and opened a new front in Tete province, a move that not only stretched Portuguese forces but also threatened Portugal's major construction project, the Cabora Bassa hydroelectric dam on the Zambezi River. The Portuguese responded with a major counter-offensive, Operation Gordian Knot, in 1971, which was led by General Cousa de Arriaga. The Portuguese colonial authorities assembled 35,000 troops, 15,000 tons of bombs, and numerous aircraft and helicopters, and focused their efforts on Cabo Delgado province. However, Machel anticipated this move and directed Frelimo guerrillas to abandon their bases, leaving the Portuguese colonial authorities to burn only empty huts. Machel's strategic leadership allowed for Frelimo to endure what was then considered the largest operation ever launched by a colonial power against an African guerrilla force. The Portuguese tactics included a scorched earth policy, which consisted of indiscriminate killings and use of incendiary bombs and chemical weapons, and this proved counterproductive. Despite heavy bombardment and significant Western media coverage, Frelimo emerged victorious, inflicting substantial losses on the Portuguese colonial authorities. Frelimo's success on the battlefield led to increased support from the Mozambican population. In 1972, Frelimo expanded its operations into the crucial provinces of Manica and Sofala. Unlike the brutal Portuguese forces, Machel and Frelimo used a softer approach to gain local support by establishing schools, farms, hospitals, a trading system, and air raid shelters for the peasants. On April 17, 1971, Machel experienced a personal tragedy when his wife, Josina, died from liver cancer at Muhimbili Hospital in Dar es Salaam. Despite his loss and grief, Machel continued his role as a guerrilla leader. Although Frelimo claimed victory over the Portuguese in Operation Guardian Knot, convincing European allies of their control over Mozambican territory was challenging. After the assassinations of Mondlane and Magaya, and the defection of Lazaro Nkavandane and the expulsion of Uriah Simango, Machel faced the difficult task of proving Frelimo's viability as a liberation movement amidst Portuguese propaganda suggesting its decline. In January of 1971, Machel visited Sofia to meet with the Bulgarian leader Todor Zhivkov, and then he traveled to Romania to meet Nicolae Ceausescu, and later went to the Soviet Union. Strengthening ties with the Eastern Bloc countries was vital for Frelimo's survival. He managed to secure the supply of weapons, clothing, and financial support. Even before Mozambique achieved its independence, Machel sought to show that Frelimo's struggle extended beyond Mozambique's colonial regime to include all forms of settler domination in Southern Africa. This position led to direct confrontations with the apartheid regime in South Africa as well as the minority regime in Rhodesia. In December of 1972, Machel invited Zimbabwean freedom fighters from ZANU to use Tete province as a base for launching operations into northern Zimbabwe. Portugal, the colonial power, was fighting not only Machel's Frelimo but also insurgencies in two other colonies, Angola and Guinea-Bissau. The wars in Angola and Guinea-Bissau were proving costly to Portugal in both human lives and finances. In 1974, during the Carnation Revolution, military officers overthrew Marcelo Caetano's Estado Novo government. The new government, known as the Armed Forces Movement, aimed at ending the wars in Mozambique and other African colonies. In early 1974, Samora Machel led Frelimo's negotiations with the Portuguese. Portugal proposed a transition that included multi-party elections, which Machel and Frelimo opposed, insisting that Frelimo was the sole legitimate representative of the Mozambican people and demanding that Portugal hand over power directly to Frelimo without any elections. On the 5th of June 1974, at a meeting in Lusaka, Portuguese Foreign Minister Mário Soares presented a ceasefire proposal to Machel. He offered a referendum with two choices: independence or remaining part of the Portuguese Empire. On June the 15th, 1974, at the 11th Summit of the Oil Organization of African Union in Mogadishu, Machel denounced the Portuguese plans to hold a referendum on Mozambique's independence. He gave a rousing speech criticizing General Antonio de Spinola's offer of referendum as bad faith, stating, "One does not ask a slave if he wants to be free, especially after he has rebelled, and still less if one is a slave owner. Machel held the upper hand as the Portuguese colonial army was demoralized and exhausted from a war it was clearly losing. To exert pressure, the Portuguese and expedite the independence process, on 1 July 1975, Machel and Frelimo opened a new front in Zambezia province. This move was significant. It led to thousands of soldiers in the colonial army deserting in Zambezia, while those who stayed refused to fight Frelimo. The mutiny spread beyond Zambezia province. 2,000 soldiers at the Bon barracks near Maputo refused deployment to war zones, and high-ranking officers at the colonial army's headquarters in Nampula declared support for halting operations against Frelimo. For Samora Machel, independence was now imminent. He embarked on efforts aimed at convincing Mozambicans of white origin to stay after independence. On July 24, 1974, Machel issued a radio broadcast urging members of the colonial army and settlers to stay and helped rebuild a new independent Mozambique. However, most whites did not accept the offer, with many fleeing to neighboring South Africa, Rhodesia, and Portugal. On the question of independence, Machel's control over most of the Mozambican countryside swayed the Portuguese, leaving them no choice but to hand over power to Frelimo without holding elections. Subsequently, on the 8th of September 1974, Machel and Portuguese representatives signed the Lusaka Agreement, granting 6 out of 10 ministerial posts, including the Prime Minister, to a transitional authority headed by Joaquim Chissano. On the 25th of June 1975, after 500 years of colonial occupation, Machel proclaimed Mozambique's independence and became the country's first president. On a personal level, in August 1975, Samora formalized his relationship with his longtime girlfriend, Graça Simbine. She was also serving as Minister of Education in Samora Machel's cabinet. On the domestic front, on February 3, 1976, Machel nationalized income from rented buildings and took over large companies in the air, land, and rail transport sectors. In order to fully transform Mozambican society into a socialist one, he nationalized the banking and insurance sectors as well as their factories. Machel and other Frelimo leaders believed that achieving their vision of a new society required transforming Mozambicans into what was referred to as a new man. Traditional cultural practices such as initiation rituals, ceremonies for evoking ancestral spirits, and the payment of bride price and marriage were prohibited. Religious groups such as Jehovah's Witnesses, traditional authorities, and those labeled as reactionaries were sent to re-education camps scattered across the country. At independence in 1975, Machel inherited a country that was effectively bankrupt with virtually no trained workforce and an illiteracy rate of over 90%. His government launched an ambitious literacy campaign and sent young people to pursue high school and undergraduate education in socialist countries such as Cuba and East Germany. However, the initial excitement of independence was short-lived. On August 5, 1975, near the Vista Alegre area close to the Rhodesian border, a Mozambican patrol encountered Rhodesian troops. In the following days, Rhodesian helicopters continued their attacks targeting both Tete and Manica provinces. In fact, the Rhodesians were not content with sporadic attacks. They robbed in Machel's opponents inside the country itself. Their choice to lead the insurgency against Machel's Frelimo government was Andre Matsangaisa, a former senior official in Frelimo. In May of 1977, with the help of Rhodesia's intelligence services, Masangaisa took up arms and formed the Mozambican National Resistance, RENAMO. Despite all this, Samora Machel was a Pan-Africanist in outlook. He believed his fight extended beyond the Portuguese colonial authorities in Mozambique to include settlers in neighboring Rhodesia and South Africa. As early as 1972, well before Mozambique's own independence, Machel allowed ZANLA, the guerrilla wing of the Zimbabwe African National Union, to operate from Tete, a province free from Portuguese control. In response to the incursions, on March 3, 1976, Samora Machel announced the closure of the border with Rhodesia and the imposition of full sanctions. He further denied Rhodesia the use of the ports of Beira and Maputo. Machel's support for Southern African liberation movements extended beyond Rhodesia. He also allowed the African National Congress, ANC, to establish offices in the Matola suburb of Maputo and provided refuge to those fleeing apartheid in South Africa. Although the guerrilla leaders in Rhodesia doubted that negotiations with the Smith regime would be fruitful, they believed that they could achieve victory through armed struggle on the battlefield. Aware of the human and material costs the Mozambican people were suffering, Machel encouraged them to seek a negotiated solution. Drawing on his experience negotiating Mozambique's independence from Portugal, he persuaded Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe to participate in diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. On the 10th of September 1979, guerrilla leaders from the liberation movements fighting the Smith regime were invited to negotiate the Lancaster process towards independence at Lancaster House in London. Machel sent a delegation to support both Mugabe and Nkomo. On the 18th of April 1980, Zimbabwe gained its independence, partly due to Machel's and Frelimo's support and the sacrifices of the Mozambican people. Machel hoped the RENAMO rebels would cease attacks once Rhodesian support had ended, but he was mistaken. South Africa then stepped in and took over sponsoring RENAMO and escalated attacks on Mozambique. On January the 30th of 1981, South African soldiers openly attacked the ANC offices in Matola, killing 12 members of the African National Congress. In response to increasing attacks, Machel introduced formal military ranks for the first time since independence. In September 1981, he took the title of Marshal of the Republic, and veteran Frelimo members were awarded senior ranks. To the South Africans, Machel symbolized the eventual victory of Africans over white power structures in Southern Africa. He had been instrumental in the fall of oppressive regimes in Portugal, Mozambique, and then Rhodesia. Machel, to the apartheid regime in South Africa, represented the hopes of millions and served as an example of South Africa's liberation movements. In May 1983, Mozambican forces captured South African soldier Peter Benjamin Schoeman, who confessed on national television that his mission was to kill Samora Machel. Later that month, South African Air Force jets bombed the town of Matola, claiming they targeted ANC operative, although the Mozambicans later revealed that the South Africans had only managed to destroy a jam factory. Recognizing the existential threat posed by South Africa, on March 16, 1984, Samora Machel signed a Good Neighbor Pact with the South Africans. Machel demanded that South Africa cease its support for RENAMO, while South Africa insisted that the ANC should desist from assisting the ANC to establish real bases in Mozambique. Consequently, Machel stopped supporting the ANC's military wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, and expelled its top leadership from Mozambique. This agreement with South Africa was controversial, but Machel had no choice. Unlike Dr. Hastings Banda of Malawi, who engaged in secret dealings with the South Africans, Machel insisted on a public ceremony as a matter of principle. The Nkomati Accord was signed on a neutral piece of land beside the Nkomati River at the border between the two countries. To Machel's dismay, the apartheid regime in South Africa did not stop supporting Renamo. In reality, the South Africans had co-opted Malawi, which Renamo started using as a springboard for attacks into Mozambique. Feeling betrayed, Machel sought support from other African leaders, including his long-term ally Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe and Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia. He confronted President Banda with evidence of Malawi's support for Renamo, including a photocopy of a passport issued to Renamo leader Alfonso Lakama. On September 11, 1986, the three presidents visited Dr. Banda in Blantyre. Machel wanted Western journalists to cover the summit to present his side of the story, but Dr. Banda banned the journalists from attending. In response, Machel held a press conference at the airport in Maputo upon his return. He threatened to close the border with Malawi to traffic between Malawi and South Africa if Malawi continued to support the Renamo bandits, and also threatened to place missiles on the border with Malawi. On October 19, 1986, Machel convened a meeting of the frontline states in Lusaka, Zambia, calling for Zaire, led by Mobutu, to stop supporting UNITA, which was also backed by South Africa. For the South Africans, this was the final straw. After the meeting, Machel's presidential jet left the Mala airstrip in northern Zambia for Maputo earlier than usual. At 9:21 on the evening of October 1986, the Soviet-made Tupolev 134 jet crashed into a hillside at Mbuzini in South Africa's Mpumalanga province, then known as the Transvaal. Machel and 34 others on board, including the Russian crew, were killed. Only 9 people survived the crash. The hillside plane crash in Mbuzini deprived Africa and the world of one of its most influential revolutionaries. Despite Mozambique facing economic turmoil and an insurgency at the time of his death, Samora Machel's legacy included the rapid expansion of education and health services. Charismatic and persuasive, Machel's leadership style ensured minimal factionalism within Frelimo, and even after his passing, a significant achievement in a culturally diverse nation like Mozambique. Thank you for tuning in, and if you have any contributions, please drop your comments below, and please join me in the next episode as we look at the career of Jonas Savimbi. Thank you. Bye.